Hey, what's going on, internet? We are back for another episode, and today we'll be talking about the difference between acrylic and oil paints. So if you're new to painting and you don't know the difference between oils and acrylics, and you're at a hobby store or an art store and you're looking at it and saying, what is the difference? Can I accomplish the same thing? To begin, let me tell you that you can accomplish just about anything you want to using both, but they both have different qualities that you want to take into account before you start painting with them. So let's go over the pros and cons between oils and acrylics. So let's look at acrylic paint. One of the pros of acrylic paint is that it dries really fast. So you can put down a glob of paint, walk away for a minute, come back, and it's going to be dry. Depends on if you use any retardants or anything like that, but usually they dry really fast. So if you want to get a painting done in a day or maybe even an hour, you can use acrylic paints and accomplish that. Another quality of acrylic paint is that it's flexible. So if I water it down enough, I can try to mimic watercolors. So you can water it down and do really thin layers or just glaze over a layer that you put down before. So that's another great quality, and it dries fast, so you can do that over and over and over and build up many thin layers. Another plus that I found working with acrylic paint is that it's more readily available. You can go into a lot of different stores and find acrylic paint. You can go to Walmart, find acrylic paint. You can go to any cheap art store or any fancy art store and buy acrylic paint. I use heavy body acrylic paint by Liquitex. I found that it's the best. It's really thick, but at the same time, it's water soluble, so you can water it down to get a really thin layer. One quality that I really like about acrylic paints is that it's cheap. So I can go into any store, like I said, even the expensive stores, and buy pretty much any type of acrylic paint cheaper than I would oil paints. So now let's hit on the cons of acrylic paints. Because it's quick drying, that means it's a little bit harder to blend. So if you put down a color and you go over it adding another color, sometimes it's already half dried and it's harder to blend. Sometimes you'll get some streaks, you'll see some brush strokes, unlike oil. So that's one thing you really have to take into account when you use acrylic paint, is that it's a little bit harder to blend, but you can figure out different techniques on how to make it easier to blend. So now let's talk about oils. So oil paints, there's a lot of pros to those and a lot of cons to those, but oil paints I use all the time. One of the qualities that I do like about oil paints is that it allows you to blend really well because it's slow drying. Sometimes it can take a week, sometimes it can take a day, sometimes it can take a month. It depends on how thick that layer is. So that's one of the things you have to think about when you want to do your painting, and whether you want to use oils or not. The drying time just depends on the thickness of the layer, the type of oil paint you're using, and whether you're using any type of added medium to that oil. So you can put down a layer, come back the next day and blend that layer with another color. So that's one of the best qualities I like about oil paints, is that you can easily blend and you can take time and work later on it and still have that wet paint feel from the last time you worked on it. So in oil painting, I think there's a lot more variety in colors, especially when you want to do your homework and dig for colors. One thing I like about oil paints is that it gives me a smoother stroke. So because it's slow drying, it doesn't get rough at the end of a brush stroke like acrylics. So when you're using oils, your brush strokes are really smooth. You can really calculate where you want the paint to end. So that's like one thing I like about it, especially when I start to blend and do lots of detailed work. There are some cons, a lot of cons when it comes to using oil paints. One is that it is expensive. Sometimes you can find a color that can run $30. If you're searching for specialty colors that aren't readily available, it can cost you a pretty penny, sometimes $50 per color, especially if you go to one of those expensive art stores. The thing about oils is that it uses turpentine. It requires turpentine to clean. It requires a lot more maintenance when you work with it. So if you're using oils and you're done, or you want to thin it out a bit, you can use turpentine, and turpentine is a toxic chemical. So working in smaller spaces sometimes isn't an option. Another con that I see, but it's not really a con in the short run, is that sometimes it can fade, your oil colors can fade over time. So that's one thing you really have to think about. But for me, I'm not looking past 100 years or so. So that is not a big con for me. That is not a big turnoff. But if you're looking to have your paintings last over 100 years, then that's something you may want to think about. So that is the video of the day, the difference between acrylic and oil paint. So definitely go out there and buy some paint. I don't care what it is, just practice, practice, practice. That is one thing that I implore. That is one thing that I will always hone in on, is that you have to practice to learn the different qualities of each of the paints and how they're applied to a canvas. You can only learn by doing. So definitely go out there and buy one of each and just figure it out. One tip that I want to give you guys is that you can't go over oil paints with acrylic paints, but you can go the other way around. You can go over acrylic paint with oils.